Budget Committee to order, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mike, if you would take the roll.
I will. Mr. Paul?
Present.
Mrs. Jocelyn?
Present.
Mrs. Janet?
Present.
Mrs. Hollenbach?
Present.
Mr. Leonard?
Present.
Should I be doing it like this? Mr. McNally?
Present.
Mr. Edwards? Present. Mrs. Rashley?
Present.
Mr. Cody?
Present.
And we have Mr. Katz is absent.
All right, thank you. The meeting got shortened because our office of town solicitor, and by that I mean generally we either have Tony DeSisto or Peter come, but neither of them could make it tonight. So I've slid their presentation to next week. So once Mrs. Surratt has a chance to get organized, we will turn things over to her. And she's going to talk about the outstanding bonds that we have, as well as some of the reports that are available on a monthly basis.
I had to collate and staple myself. Thank you so much. I obviously didn't push the right button on the copy machine.
Oh, did you get the set now?
You should have a set of 3.
Thank you very much.
Mike?
Yes.
I'm Denise.
Hi, Denise. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. You're right, we have met before.
Yes.
Not formally here.
It's okay.
Good, how are you? Jen, okay. Oh, boy, wait.
He's got it all in his head anyway.
And you are?
David.
Oh, Robin, Mike, stand up here, microphone. Okay. Good evening.
Good evening.
Okay, I just passed out, you should have a set of 3 reports. The first one page is the town's debt service schedule to maturity. So it's every piece of bond debt that we have right now by year in total, so you know when the bonds are set to mature. The second report is the total revenue, budget to actual. It's a 4-page report. It's double-sided. And then the third report is the expense budget to actual. And that is 13 pages, double-sided. I thought what I would do is just go over the format of the revenue and expense reports. These reports I issue monthly to the town council. Typically, the second town council meeting of every month, they will get the complete set of the prior month's budget to actual with a short recap, and it's usually on the consent agenda, so you can find it on clerk base for any given month. So why don't we go over revenue first? So for some of you, this will be a repeat lesson, but for those of you who are newer, if you have any questions on the report, so the way they're laid out, just stop me or let me know. Each department in town has a 4-digit code, which you will see on the left-hand column in bold next to the department's name. So like 1010 is the town clerk. And of course, the report goes in numerical order. and it's the same coding for the revenue report as it is for the expense report. Of course, the revenue report is a whole lot shorter than the expense report. We don't nearly have as much revenue as we do have expenses. Accounts, I should say. We have enough revenue to cover our expenses, but the number of accounts is a lot smaller. So each department has a budget, and for revenue, which you will learn, it's very difficult to project what revenue will be collected. A lot of the things are, some of the things, I shouldn't say a lot, maybe 50% are a fixed number, so we know what we are expecting to get. If it's state aid or the number of licenses that the clerk is renewing, she'll know what she expects in her licensing revenue. We know what we're going to get from, if you look further down on the first page, the town administrator. We pretty much have a good idea what we're going to get for Tiverton Power Associates. That's a pilot agreement we have with them, so it's pretty much a fixed number every year. Tower land rental is our cell tower rental. We do have leases, so we have a general idea, but it fluctuates if people drop off the cell towers or if they try to add somebody, you know, we'll have a little fluctuation in that area. Of course, if you flip to page 2, the tax collector section, the second line item there, tax receipts, that's our levy. So we know what that number is once the budget is approved. The school department on page 3, we typically have a pretty good idea of, ever since they instituted the funding formula for the schools, the operations aid that we get from the state. The school housing aid, that can fluctuate slightly, and we've seen that over the last few years because I've been refinancing bonds, and the state isn't as quick at catching up to recalculating the housing aid. So they'll give us a number, but then, you know, 2 years from now, they're going to recalculate that they gave us too much this year because we refinanced a bond last year. So there's a little bit of fluctuation in that number. The last section on page 3, the 9900 State of Rhode Island, that's another grouping of revenue that we have a decent idea what we're going to get. They put out a projection, actually I just got it today, of the expected 2019 state aid, but that's the governor's budget. That will not get approved or finalized until after the FTR, unfortunately. So we work with those numbers, but it's not always a given. The rest of the departmental, what we call the departmental revenue, is usually based on historical, what do we typically collect in a year in any given department. Is there any reason why we think that the revenue is going to go up or down? My revenue, or the treasurer's office, interest rates on the liquidity funds have been slowly inching up over the years, so I've seen an increase there, and I expect it to continue. So I will probably budget a little more in my revenue number for investment income, but it's really difficult at this stage of the game to guesstimate what the revenue is going to be on some departmental levels. So we usually look at historical data, and the clerk, the building official, various people will weigh in. I really think, you know, I'll be mortgage rates are down, we'll be refinancing a lot of mortgages, so our stamp tax and our recording fees are probably going to be up, so, you know, we'll boost it up a little bit. But that's pretty typical of the process that we go through to determine the revenue. The format of the report, you have 6 columns. So the original budget is exactly that. It is what gets voted on at the FTR. Budget transfers, you do not see budget transfers on the revenue report. We do not transfer revenue. We record it to wherever it belongs. So you won't see any changes in the revenue budget for from original to revised. The month-to-date column is whatever has been collected that month, obviously. Your year-to-date, so this report is from July 1 through December 31st. that is what we have collected to date, and the remaining is what we expect to collect against our original budget. So if you just take a quick look at I use the year-to-date column the most, just to see where we are in terms of our budget. So, for instance, the town clerk, she has projected to collect $267,400 this fiscal year. Well, she's already, in her office, has collected $181. So we are ahead of what we are expecting. I would caution you, when you're reviewing these reports, that there are some line items that we only collect quarterly. So you can't always say, oh, it's, 1/12 every month is what we're recognizing. That would be the case with Tiverton Power Associates. But we are halfway through the year. We have collected half the budget, so we know that we're on target for that. Most of the items in the other departments, I look at monthly just to see, are we where we should be? I also will look at where we are at this point this year versus last year to see if is there an anomaly, is there anything unusual, so that we can investigate it. Does anybody have any questions about the revenue?
So Denise, if we looked at this, like on the fourth page of the revenue, the year-to-date collections are just under 33 million, which is kind of well ahead of sort of a half-year mark. Is there?
Because of the tax quarters. Okay. So we only have one more quarter left to collect. So we've collected 3/4 of our taxes, but so we only have, if you look on page 2 in the tax collector section, we have $11 million left to collect.
Got the 11,755. Yep.
Right.
Okay.
So that pretty much you'll see. I always benchmark just in my own mind that our levy's around 40 million. So I always look for around 10 million a quarter. And that's how I know that we're, on target.
I have a more general question. You mentioned clerk-based, and everybody may not be aware of that. So could you enlighten us about where we find the clerk-based document or database?
If you go to our website and you go to the left-hand column, online documents, and if you click on that, big block comes up that says clerk base. And if you click on clerk base, that is where you will find all of the town council agendas and meeting minutes. And these reports are attached to the agenda for that month. So if you wanted to take a look back and see, well, where were we 3 months ago? If you look through the agendas for the town council 3 months back, I've got it on a pretty good schedule that you'll find these reports in the second meeting of the month. You can just look there, and it's always on the consent agenda, usually item 7. And if you find that on the agenda, it'll click you right through to the reports.
Okay, thank you.
Any other revenue questions? Mike, did you have a question?
Yes, I just want to make sure the year-to-date actual, which is column 5, you said that was July 1st through December 31st?
Right, it's fiscal year.
Fiscal year, thank you.
So right now, we're at 6 months.
And then Denise, the general fund withdrawal, that year-to-date is 0.
Right.
Is that done just once during the year?
To balance the budget, which means to get these two reports, your original budget columns to balance, and as part of the FTR approved budget, there was a general fund withdrawal of roughly $98,000. Well, once they go through the whole reconciliation of the levy, there's always a fluctuation of several $1,000s either way, depending on what the valuation comes out to. So that basically will, once you put in the levy, then you're left with, well, what do I need to take out of the general fund to balance this budget? We had approved 98,000. Well, when they do the docket, it says on or about, so we all know that that number could fluctuate. And to balance this budget, it was 103,000. I do not touch that number until we get through the whole year, because there's no reason to touch it until we know at the end of the year, do we need to take anything out? And so far, if you look at revenue, we're up in several places, so I'm very hopeful that we won't have to touch that withdrawal. Turning now to the expense report, it is set up exactly the same way. Naturally, there are far more departments with expenses than revenue. There's a lot of not extra, but like we have the first, I'll just go through it. The first section of this report, page 1, 0980, non-recurring expenses. Those are all items that are either lease payments or one-time capital type items that have been approved at the FTR. For instance, and I try to code them so you know what department they belong to. We have the DPW, FD is the fire department, the PD, there was no PD this year. The streetlight purchase and conversion is a capital item. And anything that's considered not operating, you'll find here. What you will find here as well is the last item in that section, 9999, capital reserve restricted. Last year's FTR, there was a resolution to put 25% of the unexpended funds into a capital reserve account. So this is the way to demonstrate so that you can see, and we're completely transparent, where that money went to. So there was no budget, as you notice, zero original budget, but we had $99,997 of unexpended funds at the end of last year. 25% went to paving, 25% went here, and then the rest went back to the general fund. So I think the idea behind this capital reserve account is just to slowly build it up so that when we have a capital need, we can either use those funds, use a portion of those funds as a down payment, whatever, but it's, the first time we've been able to do that, so it's a start. Following that section, just like the revenue report, there's a section for each department. The 4-digit numbers that begin with a 5 are all salary related. The 6s and 7s and beyond are operating expenses. You will find similar 4-digit numbers across all the departments, so that, all the department manager salaries are the same number, just a different department, of course. All the supplies, 7423, is the same way across the board. You may find, depending on how hard you study this report, that in certain circumstances, a department manager has requested a different title to their account because they use it for a specific purpose. So it's supplies, but it's a specific purpose. So I usually will grant that request, and we'll note that if they want to change the title of the account. But that's usually far and few between. One of the things that's slightly different about this report than revenue, as I had mentioned, is you will see budget transfers in the expense report, and that's in the second column. So, for instance, there's two things that you'll see in that second column. You will see a budget transfer, which is a request to transfer funds from one line item to another, or you'll also see the carry forwards from a previous year into the restricted accounts, which I just showed you, like the capital reserve. If you go to the Board of Canvas section, which is the fourth one down, 1030. The second line item is elections restricted account. You see a number in there in the budget transfer column. That is an account that carries forward every year. Whatever's left from the previous year gets carried forward to the next year. The reason that has, we're doing that is because our election expenses vary constantly. Every 4 years, they spike like this. So in order to kind of even it out over the years, and so you don't see those spikes, we allow, it's an FTR resolution, we allow it to carry forward. So we appropriated in 2000, fiscal year 18, 20,000, which is the original budget. The Board of Canvas has a 35,581 carry forward, so their revised budget is 55,581. Right now, at the end of this year, they have 45,861 left over. Now, I don't think there's any more elections for the rest of the year, right? But that's a separate account. So, barring any other major expenses, that 45 will carry forward to next year. The 3,500 that you see above that in the Town Council Contingency Fund, they've transferred out $3,500 to other accounts in the budget, which, as we go through it, you'll see on the positive side, the $3,500. Does anybody have any questions about that? And similarly, it gets reviewed for monthly reasonableness compared to last year. We look at year-to-date, where are we? This report, the department managers request these reports regularly. They usually have some kind of a proof in place to prove their accounts and their budgets to what we have in our departments. So if there was a slip of a finger and something got posted wrong, we're always making sure that we take care of that. There'll be a test later.
Pardon?
There'll be a test later. Any questions?
So, I don't know if now get into details. So if you look at the page 13, right down the bottom, saying that in terms of transfers, there's been $511,000, right?
That's a good point. Actually, your transfers always net to zero. So if the town council transferred 3,500 out, there's 3,500 going in somewhere else. That 511,008 is the total of the carry forwards from last year, which is elections, paving, and revaluation. So that 511,008, if all of our accounting and math is right, should never change.
Right.
It'll stay there because that's what came forward.
Great. So if I look, like the big, for instance, is on page 11, midway through the
Paving,
page,
right.
There's $283,000, and
In
that
paving.
was in a reserve account for paving, correct?
Right.
And we're saying
Right.
we think we're going to use that this year.
Right. So, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, they restricted the paving account, and anything that's left over from the previous year gets carried forward and added to the appropriation. You'll notice that there was nothing appropriated
Right.
for paving in this fiscal year, so they're still working off the money that was left over. And it's typically not that large, but between the superintendent, the DPW director leaving, and then someone else coming, some of the paving projects that they had planned for fiscal year 17 didn't get finished, but they got finished in the summer, so. And paving, of course, is seasonal, so you'll probably see all that money that's sitting in there now spent once the spring is over.
And, I'm sorry, tell me again, the carryovers from elections, paving, and what was the third?
Revaluation, which is on page 3 at the bottom. That's another account similar to elections. We don't do a full revaluation every 3 years, 5 years, so they do the, what do they call it when they do the statistical one, and then they do the full one. So to avoid these big hills and valleys in the expense, they try to even it out and just budget X amount of dollars every year. So they just keep rolling that over so that when the full reval comes, and I think it costs around $300,000, we'll have enough money to pay it that year.
Excuse my newness.
That's okay.
So on page 9, could you just explain to the new person here, 6630, the library services?
Oh, yes.
And how
Okay.
that is the largest balance? I understand it's probably all comes out at one time for some reason, but
The library appropriation, so we appropriated $565,000 to the library. It's one number. They have their board of trustees and their director, similar to the school department, has the say in how it gets spent. I have to break it up in salaries and benefits and operating for other reporting purposes. So that's why you see what could appear to be deficit balances in personnel, because I don't have a budget that I'm working off of, but I never would go over the 565 in total. They spend that, it's usually on a stable basis. However, they get a quarterly reimbursement, which we just recorded, so it sends it the other way, which makes it appear to be a little bit not as smooth, I guess. So and actually, it's not actually quarterly. We like it to be quarterly, but we get it from the state. And depending on when we actually receive it is when it gets recorded. So sometimes we don't work on the accrual basis, so if we have something due at the end of the quarter and we don't get it until the first week of the following month, that's when it gets recorded.
so it's just very inconsistent because it's involving the state and the way
Right.
they do things. So at the end of the
Right.
year, it balances.
At the end of the year, it balances.
Is
Thank
their payroll also processed through the town?
Yes.
So does that come back on another, so does that come out of the town, or is that part of that 500, and then it comes back in?
The library, I charge them directly for everything. So all of their bills, their payroll, anything associated with their payroll gets charged directly to their appropriation, so that there's no reimbursement. It comes all out of the general fund, and I just charge their appropriation, very similar to the school. Any other questions?
Could you say a few words about your bond?
Oh, sure. Okay, so, you might need a ruler for this one. I put them in the order of maturity, if you will. So the first bond, the first two columns, principal and interest, is the Pecasset School Bond, which was refinanced in fiscal year 2017. So without getting into too deeply into the conversation, part of the bond could not be refunded. So we have payments due on a portion of the bond, and then the rest of the bond was refinanced with the new renovation money that we just did in 2017. So you'll see that next year, there will no longer be a Pecasset School bond payment in this first column. It ends in 2019 fiscal year. However, if you bring yourself over to the last column, what was left of the Pecasset School bond has been rolled into this bond when we went out to do the high school HVAC and the roofs. So they combined those. It was some savings because we were able to do both of them at the same time. The TIF bond, which is the second set of numbers you see, principal and interest, that was refinanced in 2014. That is the tax increment revenue bond, which is related to the Starwood sewer line from, I don't know what year that was from.
2000.
2000. So that one will be maturing in 2022. So that one will be falling off our books. The next is Ranger in the high school, similar to the renovation in Pecasset. When we refinanced in 2016, it was more cost-effective to do the two bonds together. So we combined those two bonds. And when we refinanced, just as a point of interest, we never extended the term. We always kept it to what the original term was.
High school bonds that was rolled in with Ranger. What was that?
That was from, it was one of the first bonds. It was like 3 million.
2002, 3.7.
Yeah, and what did they do with that?
That was the science wing, the guidance wing in the fields. Yeah. Right, Denise?
And science?
The guidance.
Science labs and guidance.
In the field.
So it was a renovation or addition kind of bond.
The guidance was
An addition.
Oh, okay. Fort Barton is maturing in 2028. So in 10 years, we will have matured 4 of the bonds. So we'll be left with just the library and the newest one to renovate the high school and the middle school. We do receive, if you look at your revenue report, page 3. In the school department section, 7,700, the third, I want to say paragraph, but the third department down, school housing aid. So the state does participate, and we, it's roughly 31 to 32% revenue to help pay for the school bond. But it comes in as revenue. So we always have to budget the gross amount of the bond payment, even though that money goes to help us pay it. You can't net them.
You said 31 to 32%?
It's roughly 31 to 32%. And if you look a little further down under the state of Rhode Island, the library construction aid, very similar, except we get 66% on the library.
So Denise, to read this, right, if we looked at current fiscal year, we're in 2018, march all the way to the far right, we have a total debt service of $4,269,000, right? And
Please
then
tell me it agrees to my report.
What's that? And then if you look at the revenue, and for just the line item, you said for the school housing aid, right there, there's a budget of, we're expecting to receive from the state $848,000, right? So 848,000 goes against the 4.2.
Right,
All right.
right, but we always budget gross, because I think the philosophy behind that is we have to make this debt payment, and it has to be made gross, of course.
Okay.
If we didn't receive the state aid, we still have to make the bond payment at what's due, the debt service.
Is there a limit on, I've heard this in public, is there a number of bonds before we can't borrow anymore? I've heard
There's not
it
a-
bonded out, is that a?
There's not a number of bonds, but we do have a debt ceiling. And we have not reached the debt ceiling, but we're close. I don't know it right off the top of my head, and I don't want to misstate it. It is in the, clearly stated on its own page, probably the third to the last page of the financial statements. There's a little synopsis about where we are, what, the state allows us 3% of our assessed value, the townwide, is that the calculation? So the townwide assessment, 3% of that, we can borrow up to that.
And are there, can you prepay bonds?
Well, no. In one answer, no. We've refinanced all the bonds to date. And there's clauses in the documents, you can't refinance for X amount of years. would have to, I think they suggest if you wanted to set aside funds to pay the bonds down, it would be similar to any other reserve account that we would have. We would just set money aside, and then when the bond payment comes due, we take it out of there rather than the operating. But you still have to appropriate to get the money into that account.
And Denise, just one update. The new middle school, high school bond is a 39% reimbursement from the state because it's health and safety issues.
Is it 39? Okay. Sally's not smiling. Is it 39?
I'm on the committee, she's not.
Okay, okay,
Yeah, 39.
okay. Which we won't start getting that reimbursement until the project is done. So,
Oh, I didn't realize that.
no. RIDE has to come in, bless the project. They, similar to the library, they came down, they sent their oldest person down. They spent a couple of days auditing all of the documents. And then once they are happy with everything, then they will issue, I got a letter, basically confirming what we can expect. And a schedule.
As a sidebar, when would that estimate be? This summer?
I thought it was going to be the end of the summer.
Yes, I was going to say fall.
Yeah, it was going to span 2 whole summers.
Mhm.
Are they on target?
We're actually ahead of schedule slightly. The warm weather, up until the end of December really did help us, and they're actually ahead of schedule. Just, by like a week or two, not any major amount of time. And we haven't touched the boilers yet. We're very worried about.
That won't be done while they're in
Taking.
school, right? That'll be over the summer, that won't be done while they're in the
Correct.
building, right, when the students are in the building?
Correct. They are doing work now, but they start at 3. They work 3 to 11. So there are students still in the building, obviously because of after-school activities, but it's not during the school day. But we haven't touched the boilers yet, and that's our big concern.
And any other questions?
I've got one, so it's along the lines of the question you had asked about the bonds, and they have rules about being paid off early. What about financed vehicles and apparatus? Do the same rules apply on a financed vehicle? They can be paid off early?
Usually, you have to make 1 or 2 payments. But if I had come into a little bit of money, that's probably the first thing that I would do, is pay off those older leases especially, because they're at higher rates than what we're looking at now.
Okay, I want to make note something and then ask Madam Treasurer to talk a little bit about another topic before she goes on to another topic. I think I would ask that everybody keep in mind that what we're running here is a in round numbers, a $49 million enterprise. Parts of it operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There are very emotional issues involved. I've served in enough capacities in town government to run into all those emotional issues. And if somebody has a heart attack at a house and the ambulance is perceived to be slow arriving, there is a great deal of angst. So there's a dichotomy. People will say, well, taxes are too high. But boy, when it's their house that made the 911 call, they don't want to hear that. They want to have that ambulance right there, right then. And that's just human nature. I mean, we are what we are. That's not a criticism. But it is a complex operation. I think based on some exposure I've had in another world to the operation of Twin Rivers over in Lincoln. That was when I was doing something different. I think we will find that the complicated world that we have now, which is sufficiently complicated, will get a little bit more, not a lot, but it will be another little element. And the fact that we're right cheek to jowl to a good-sized community in a different state also causes some minor complication. But keep in mind, 49 million, 24/7, and there are a lot of emotional issues involved. The ambulance, safety of the children at school. So it's sometimes people will say, well, we should run the town like a business. Before I started my second career, I had 29 years in the corporate world. You cannot run the town like you run the corporation. When I was running the company, I could make a decision. If I didn't like Mike's rate of payment, I would say, Mike, we're not going to sell you anything anymore. Well, if the fire department gets a call in Tiverton, they don't have the privilege of saying, well, you know, that's kind of in a steep part of town. Yeah, it's a hot day. We're not going to come. No, you got to come. So, although you can use business practices, and Mrs. Surratt has done a great job, I think, in professionalizing the treasurer's office and keeping the data in good order, you can't equate the two because it does get involved in health and safety. And then, oh, by the way, just to make it even more fun, you throw in a dash of politics. So keep that in mind as we go forward. Then I would ask... I hate
snow now more than ever.
I would ask Denise just to make a comment on all the different regulations, but Gadsby in particular. And then a question, when are we going to be able to see the audit report?
They actually I just got an email that they're changing another Gadsby, so.
Well, you got to start and tell us what Gadsby is.
Gadsby is Government Accounting Standards Board, and I think their job is to keep their job, so they constantly change the way they want things reported. But in fairness, over the last few years, you've probably heard a lot about pension liabilities, OPEB liabilities, all of these liabilities that the town has that are not supported by a loan agreement or, you know, payments that we're making, but it's basically promises made contractually to employees, you know, after they retire. So while you don't necessarily see it in the budget, other than retiree health care, Gadsby wants you to be able to know if the town closed tomorrow, what do we owe our retirees? So they came up with an actuarial method of measuring that, which is based on mortality tables and health insurance and guessing basically how old people will be when they join the police and fire and when they retire, and will they you know, have a spouse, and how many children will they have, and how long do we think they'll live. And so there's a lot of guesswork in there. But Gadsby basically wants it reported now in the financial statements. So you see what happens is when they change these rules, you know, we go from having liabilities of 10 million, say, to a liability of 34 million. And people are like, what is that? Well, we have a $24 million OPEB liability, which is what they calculate that we owe for the next 30 years for OPEB, which stands for Other post-employment benefits. They did the same thing with when they had pension reform. They want people to be able to see what is our pension liability. What is our pension liability versus the assets that we have to pay that liability. So they just changed a lot of the reporting, which changes the balance sheet, which changes your net assets, which changes your equity. And when they implement these changes, you see it, we don't see it in the operating budget because that's our operating budget. That's the money we're working for, our expenses, our revenue. This is like long-term liabilities. This is things that people don't always pay attention to, but these folks do. So, and the state does. And the state wants to see how we measure up to other communities. So they're always requesting these valuations, which you will see when we go over my budget is, I don't know why they're in my budget, but they're in my budget. So I have to budget to pay for these actuarial studies. And two of them are the GASB 45 and OPEB and the fixed assets and that kind of stuff. So that's a big part of recent changes in regulatory reporting. As far as the audit goes, the state last year has implemented what they call a municipal transparency reporting system. And they divided the 39 cities and towns in Rhode Island into 3 phases. And they were slowly phasing in the changes that they were requiring us to make in our audit statement over the course of 3 years. So we are in phase 2. They called me last year and wanted me to participate in phase 2, and I agreed. And what that meant was the audit had to be done earlier. We had to provide a lot more detailed information to this transparency portal. And the school had to do the same thing. And then the state drafted this spreadsheet, if you will, really big spreadsheet, that to reconcile the financial statements to this municipal transparency portal. The town side was admittedly a little bit easier than the school as far as the reconciliation goes for a couple of reasons. But the school's required to report all of their data to RIDE, their UCOA file, as far as I understand, and then it comes back and it's validated, and then we report it to the state. Well, the state and UCOA had some differences. They couldn't figure out what they were. We did have the departure of the school business manager and a couple of vacations over there, so there was a little bit of timing issues, so we had to extend the audit. The audit is done. All of that is done, but we couldn't issue the report without this additional information the state was requiring. So they are actually working on trying to figure out how they want this to be presented. So we had to extend. I was not happy about that because we have not had to extend the audit in 7 years, but I had no choice.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I can give you the results of the audit, but it has not been officially issued.
Yeah, okay.
The extension was expiring today, but the state told us yesterday that they needed more time.
Okay, thank you. Now, would you like to go over your preliminary budget?
Oh, sure.
Okay, so.
So you should have that in your book.
Yes, it's broken in the book, but I also, in our magic mailbox, found individual copies that somebody.
Oh, goodness. Let me make sure I have the right one.
So we don't even have to go to our book. And it's a wonderful budget because it all fits on one page.
I know, I love it.
with remarks.
Alex, what is your total request for me? Let me make sure I have the right one. Oh, 186, 330. Okay. My budget's very straightforward, and as you can see over the last 3 years, doesn't change much. I have reduced my staff by half a person. I have one of my employees this summer, a long-time AFSCME, 33 years, retired. So we kind of reconfigured the office, and we ended up with 2 full-time people. Right now, I have no longevity in my office because both of the employees, one of them is not eligible anymore, but the one that is has not reached the 5-year mark yet. So that'll be coming up, I think, next year sometime. My office equipment, I have a service contract on my copier, which is the bulk of that, and potentially might add a couple of filing cabinets. Education and seminars, I go to a couple a year, but I use that primarily for training on my general ledger. If I need, especially with these reporting changes, we will work remotely and do training, and I have to pay for it. My phone, we have 2 phone lines and a fax machine. Computerized payroll, the Affordable Care Act reporting. As much as I would like that to go away, it's not. There's not a whole lot I can do about that. That's the year-end issuing all of the 1095s and 96s to the employees in the healthcare. GASB 45, OPEB. That report is done every 2 years, and it has recently increased in price. And it's actually this year we were just in, because they issued 2 new GASB requirements, the report was like $11,000. So I budget that over 2 years. The consulting services, I have a fixed asset consultant that just maintains all of the records for the insurance purposes, for the audit, the depreciation. So anytime we add fixed assets, I have to report all of that information to them, and they have a database. We do not have fixed assets software. So this is probably the least expensive option, and they provide all of the reports for the insurance company and for the audit. There's a bond trustee payment every year that's paid to the banks that do all of the bond payments. I mean, I pay the bond debt service, but then they have to turn around and take all that money and pay the investors, and they charge a fee of roughly $1,000 a year. Supplies and miscellaneous, we pay for all of the postage, paper, checks, ink, for all of the paper and, all of the bills that the departments don't pay their own. We don't charge it out to them, so we pay for everything. And software, I have a support contract, and then we do not have IT department at the town hall. We do have a company who does a great job for a nominal fee, but every now and then we have issues that we have to get additional support for, because we don't have in-house IT. And, we all can only do so much. So that's it. So my budget actually went down this year.
Yep.
Why did computerized payroll go up? $750?
The fees go up. It's based on, paychecks has gone up.
And all of these numbers, Ken, you have the backup to verify everything, right? If anyone wanted to go, if anyone on the budget committee wanted to go see it?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Very good. We thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Anytime.
Thank you.
And if anybody needs anything, the best way to reach me is my email. It's treasurer@tiverton.ri.gov.
Thank you.
Thank you, Denise.
You're welcome.
Thanks very much.
Okay, and when the audit reports become official, they're rather large documents, most of which we don't much care about. But there are some very key sets of numbers in there that over time will be of interest to us. And talking about over time, we're still in the situation where we have preliminary budgets, and the final budgets aren't due until probably sometimes in April. I haven't gone through and counted the weeks to come up with a date, but for example, on the treasurer's budget, I can't, I think maybe once in the past several years there's been a minor change, but both the treasurer and the clerk changes a little bit because of the Board of Canvassers, elections, and then the clerk has several, I'll call them dotted lines to the state, and with different little requirements. For example, the State Board of Elections can come in and tell the local Board of Canvassers they've got to do some maintenance on the records or some such. So there will be little jigs like that, but both the treasurer and the clerk's office, the preliminary is pretty much what you'll see on the final. So I see that we have our council town president here, and I'm going to impose on her good nature before we go forward to give us a status, because I know there was a meeting last night when we were given the budget from the municipal side at the meeting last week. The council had not voted on anything on that budget. Now, just a bit of history. Going back not that many years ago, the town council did not used to vote on the budget for the municipal side. And when I say not that many years ago, it was like 10, 11 years. It was voted, the town administrator and department heads would put it together, and it would go to the budget committee. And the town council never voted on it, which when I was elected to the town council, I found that rather amazing. And then there was a charter change, and at that point, the council had to start taking responsibility for their budget. But that's old history. So here we are now, so I'll ask Mrs. Willis to give us a little update of where we're at.
I just want to warn you, the budget is going to change drastically, I have a feeling. There's been some priorities that were made by the administrator that's not necessarily the council's priorities. Especially capital right now, we're looking into some changes there. As you know, we have a lot of plows that have broken down and been fixed. And if you notice, there's no plows on what was given to you. So this week what we did, excuse me, I have a really bad cold. This week what we did was we met with the DPW director. He gave us his needs. And we went through his budget because there was some questions on his budget that we felt were not there that should have been priorities. So we didn't vote on anything. We just listened to what he had to say. Next week, I plan on doing fire and police and look at their capital because there might be some stuff that we may not want to necessarily buy this year. We also looked, and I don't know if you guys ever got that, is an inventory of all the cars we own. I think we looked at it last year, but I don't think we have it. So I'm going to send you that too, because it's very interesting to see what departments were bought the newest cars recently. And that's what we looked at when we looked at our capital, who had the oldest equipment and what we could do to fix that. So that will be coming to you. But quite frankly, in my opinion, nothing in that budget right now is written in stone until we actually go through it, and especially capital may change. Now, I would assume that capital is going to be the first thing you discuss?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. I think you did, maybe not last year.
Well, the first thing we discussed last year was bonds.
That's right.
Since we have absolutely, utterly no choice as to what we're going to do with bonds.
But then when you started with our budget, I think we went over capital first.
Yep. I frankly don't remember.
I think so. So that will be ready, I think, once, I think we have a meeting next week, or the week. Well, I have 4 meetings next week. I'm not sure if one of them is budget. But at that budget meeting, we will meet with the fire and the police. And that's when our capital should look pretty much what we think it should. And I probably will try to vote on a capital by the next meeting or the meeting after. But I plan on having budget workshops all the way through this. All right. Anything else?
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay. Moving on to review and approval of minutes. We have the December 14th minutes, which are very brief. Do I have a motion to approve the December 14th meeting minutes?
So move.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Did you want a change, because there is there's an error, Mr. McGreevy,
Yep.
town
We should-
administrator,
we should
so,
change town solicitor to town administrator.
so I will change that as I did those minutes.
Yep.
And,
So to vote on approving the minutes as amended by that one-word change. All in favor?
Aye.
Then we have the January 11th. Meetings. Which that meeting is actually rather disjointed because of the composition of the broader group.
and if I can just, because I started these and then Mike kind of took over, I did help him with these, and attached on the second page, I think actually second into the third page, are the minutes from Nancy Mello, who took the minutes from the joint part of the meeting. I had also taken minutes, so very general, so there's kind of a duplication there, but I did attach her minutes to the back.
Make a motion to accept the January 11th, 2018 minutes.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Unanimously approved. Brings us to 4. Now, the first thing under 4 is site visit planning, then spreadsheet production, and then determination of other procedures. And I'm gonna start a little bit with determination of other procedures, because that changes some of the other stuff. So I'm going to bounce back and forth a little bit. So if there are any agenda purists, I apologize in advance. Now, we have, under the financial town referendum timetable, we have very set things that have to happen. And they all count back from the vote, which is, I think it's the first Saturday in May. And then you count back by weeks, by days. So there is a series of trigger lines. We have to, as a committee, we have to have our recommendations to the clerk by a date certain. And so that led me to put this comment about ongoing spreadsheet production process. As we get down to the final situation, it gets a little bit hectic sometimes when there are motions and then other motions and et cetera. And so what I would like to do, what I'd like to try this year is suggest to you all, because you're the ones that have to make up your mind, that we have a person who is responsible for keeping an electronic spreadsheet. Now, last year, our secretary also kept more of a table spreadsheet. It could have been just making notes on the actual budget. And that was very good because that gave us a cross-check. And we had a couple people that were running spreadsheets. But to make sure that when we come down to the last few weeks that we're all in sync, I would like to have one volunteer who's good with spreadsheets. Now, to give you an idea of my expertise in spreadsheets, I'm a really big fan of Lotus 1, 2, 3. And ever since those days, I've always had the privilege of having very talented people work for me that did spreadsheets. But I'm not quite that bad. I'm hamming it up a little bit, but spreadsheets are not my forte. So we need somebody that's comfortable, that can take the budget, load it in their computer, their laptop, and then as we go forward, keep track of the changes. At the same time, I would like to see the secretary keeping track, along with who votes for what. And then, like I say, either making a table on a computer or making notes on paper, but somehow have an electronic spreadsheet and then more traditional hard copy, so that when we're down to the end, we can produce a copy. Because you know, Murphy's Law is alive and well. When you need Wi-Fi, it doesn't work. So I'll leave it there. So we don't necessarily need to get a volunteer tonight. If there's somebody that wants to, that's great. If not, we can do that next week. So that's one thing to think about. I will pause and give any person an opportunity to spring forward and volunteer, but if you want to think about it a little bit, that's okay too.
Can I just say something short? I know that Justin's really good at it. I'm also very adept at Excel, so I don't know that I have the time for that, but I'm pretty sure Justin will want to do it in any case, so I'm just throwing that out there. And then some of us could maybe look over on his sheet, you know, too.
Yep.
So the other thing is, we already have those spreadsheets put together from last year. We can pull them out. I can work with Mike on the spreadsheet I did last year. I mean, all the formulas are already in there.
Yep.
The formulas are all in there. It's just a matter of adding numbers in, and it calculates.
Now,
I'm going to decline any extra work, please. Thank you. Adamantly, please. Thank you.
so,
the other spreadsheet is already put together.
Yep.
So it's
there's
just,
there's a couple minor changes, I think, in the format, but in
Right.
essence,
right, so it's just formulas in that spreadsheet. That's
So
basically.
it'll just be a matter of keeping the numbers up to date. And if more than one people keep it, I don't know whether that's good or bad, because if more than one person does it, then we have the opportunity of two different answers. So sometimes it's better to have a single source.
Yeah, but with numbers, there should be only one, so.
Yeah, it should be. Strange how that doesn't always work out. Then the other thing is, now I want to come back to procedures a little bit. And this is where you need to ponder a bit. Historically, the Budget Committee has conducted site visits to all the departments. I personally think that that is a very helpful process. It gives us a chance to see the actual conditions of the buildings, the equipment, so on and so forth. It also gives the department heads and some of their colleagues an opportunity to make their case for what they're dealing with and what they think they need to carry out the responsibilities of the department. So I find it particularly helpful. Now, I've been on enough visits and so on and so forth that I pretty well know. But usually you learn something all the time because it's an ongoing operation. There's wear and tear. There's new regulations, so on and so forth. So I would ask that somebody, again, either tonight or next week, volunteer to make the schedule for site visits. Now, I blithely said make the schedule for site visits, but I need to ask, do you all want to do it? Because there's nothing that says we have to do it.
I would like to. I found it very informative last year, and I'd like to see the things that changed.
Yeah.
And I found it very useful.
Yeah, I'm particularly curious how those big, brand-new, shiny Mack trucks that we saw last year broke at the first sight of snow. I'm being facetious.
They just got into an accident.
There was electronic problems, not the mechanical
It was all
stuff.
ice, it slid right down the hill.
So, the way I worked it last year, when I set it up, which worked very well, is I coordinated with the town administrator, who in this case is Mrs. Mello, who is also here, and then the town administrator quickly delegated the task to his administrative assistant. And what I did was put together a schedule, sent it to her, and then she passed it on to all the department heads. And it worked very well that the request came from the boss's office instead of the budget committee chairperson. So whoever volunteers to do that scheduling, I would say you should talk to Mrs. Mello and get her approval to use the same technique. And there was always, the way the Mary Lou set it up, she would send it out. Then if there was any give or take or swapping of dates, the department heads would come right to me as a scheduler, and we'd work it out. But that seemed to work pretty well. Prior years, we went directly to the department heads, and sometimes they're a little bit hard to catch up with because they have a busy schedule. But like all organizations, when you see an email from the boss's office, for some strange reason, we all tend to pay just a little bit more attention to that. So I'll be looking next week for a volunteer to do the site visit planning. Now,
Mr. Chairman, I have a question on the site visits. I know it's officially a budget committee meeting, correct? So it has to be posted?
We post them, and we post them as workshops.
Okay.
So there's notice that they're going on, and people can come.
Exactly,
People
okay.
can come, which in a few cases, 1 or 2 people have showed up.
All right.
But never a large number.
Yeah. Have they ever been advertised? I think that's something that if people see the condition of some of these vehicles, some of these buildings, maybe they won't go to the poll so blind.
Yep.
Everybody's got a lot to say about the snow, for example, but if they go see the condition of these vehicles, they'll think twice.
To the best of
new
my
vehicles?
knowledge, they've never been
The
advertised.
brand-new vehicles?
That are broken, yes.
Other than through the posting of meetings, which go out electronically, they're available on Secretary of State, and then they're posted at the library, town hall.
In town hall.
Yeah.
Library and town hall. And one of the things, that we post them as a workshop because we don't vote. We take no votes there,
We don't have to have a quorum either, do we?
and we don't have to have a quorum.
No. And we don't take minutes and,
But they are officially open to the public.
yeah, oh, yes, yes. Yeah. Mrs. Mello,
But you're not gonna have 100 people truck through
No.
a fire department
Right.
that may be active at that time or something.
well,
So, I
that's
mean,
a voice of
it's
reason.
Within reason.
Are you allowed to take pictures of the things, the conditions that you see, and post them on social media, anything like that? What is the logistics? Oh, we have to ask the solicitor that.
I think we would want,
posting it on social media, I'm not sure.
I think we would want to discuss that with the trust, and the trust being the group that has the liability insurance. Because if you took a picture from the wrong angle, it could send out a very distorted.
could do it, but public.
Oh, yeah, that, I guess that's,
But I mean, if that's a policy set, you better run that by someone.
Yeah, yeah, because I've seen in my other
That's not how
life,
we do it.
I've seen cases where there was a photograph taken in a social setting, and then later there was an accident, and that photograph that was taken when we were having a Christmas party at the plant, that piece of equipment showed up in that photograph looking different than it really was when it was in operation, and that became quite a bone of contention. And, that's yesterday's newspaper. But anytime you start putting photographs up on social media, I think that opens up the possibility of photoshopping and filters and who knows what. So I would defer. I don't think my pay grade's high enough to make that decision. I think I would talk to Tony about that. And he would probably talk to the liability people. And we also have to think about the personnel involved, because you can't, nobody can go around taking pictures of us and then
I was
doing
thinking
things
more
with.
equipment was my
Yeah.
question.
Yeah,
Was the
but you have
condition of
to-
equipment, which is where
Yep.
that was my
Yep.
kind of thought process.
Yep, but you have to be careful with that. So that's something I can check, but I don't know the answer. So the next thing is that historically, the Budget Committee always meets with the department heads. Now, we have, as I mentioned way back in December, we have a dichotomy there, because with the school committee, we never meet with the principals of the different schools. And last year, I raised that as a possibility, and Mr. Rearick's blood pressure went up several points, because that would be quite a break with tradition. Well, I would throw out this proposition for you to think about. Since the council votes on the budget, And there's no sense talking to the department heads until the council has had their vote. Why bother to talk to the department heads? They've already made their case to the council. The council has voted. We don't make policy. All we do is make a value judgment and make a recommendation on the scope of the budget. Are you, Mr. and Mrs. Taxpayer, getting value for your tax payment? And we don't mandate it. We say, here's our recommendation. But ultimately, it comes back to the school committee and the town council, because we can move the money around in different accounts, and then once the budget is approved, the town council, by majority vote of 4 people, can move money around. Now, we've restricted the voters, because we can't do anything, we just recommend. The voters have restricted certain accounts. But as you see from the report that Mrs. Surratt handed out, there are a lot of accounts. So the town council can move things around among those with impunity. So my personal observation is that it's really a waste of time to interview the department heads after the fact. But that's just me. It does give them a chance to get in trouble because it gives them a second chance to make their case. And over the years, I've seen one guy in particular that pretty well put the noose around his neck and criticized his boss. And guess what? When it was time for contract renewal, for some reason that contract wasn't renewed. Now, was there a linkage between those two things? I don't know. But that was a long time ago. Times have changed.
So
But
are you proposing, last year we heard from each department head,
Yep.
and you're saying
I think it's a waste of
don't
time.
ask them to come?
Yeah, that's just my personal opinion. The council votes, the school committee votes. We don't hear from the principals. We don't give the principals a chance to come in and say, but
there's
that's up to you.
Two things regarding principals. Is it possible that for each school that each principal could meet us?
That's never been, excuse me, I've got to get back to the microphone. That's never been a policy. The school superintendent has always, that's a dangerous word, always and never are dangerous words. In my context, the school superintendent has always conducted the tours. In some cases, members of the school committee are also there, but not always.
Can I ask a question? When you've toured in the past, on their own accord, have the principals ever attended?
Not to my knowledge.
I think one did.
One
last
did,
year.
one did. He was an acting principal.
Yeah.
Did,
And were they informed, when you went through, were they kind of informative?
Yes.
Yeah, I want to say
Yeah.
it was Picasso, was it
No.
Dan, no?
Was it the middle school?
I think it was in
No.
middle
It's
school,
been a
Mr.
while.
McKinnon.
I gotta get my notes. But
So it would be the high school if it was supposed to be.
Excuse me. thanks.
Yeah.
so it was Mr.
So at that
McKinnon
point, were you able during
Fort
the site
Barton.
visits to ask them specific questions about what they had in the budget for last year, and was there a benefit to it?
I don't
could ask any
remember
questions we
ever
wanted,
hearing
yeah.
the
Of the
principal.
principal?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But
Um,
we didn't always ask everything, but, because we were just having a tour, we didn't think that way, but it's possible, yeah.
And let me remind everybody to be sure and talk into your microphones. They're quite directional. So we can hear there, but on the recording.
I feel that it's important to have the department heads here to talk to us, because otherwise, we're just signing off on what the council does. Like, what's our purpose if we're not listening? Because we have made changes, we've made some recommendations, and just because the council has voted on it, it may not have been what the majority of the council wanted for a certain item, but maybe there were some, give and take on some items. So I think that I really would like to hear from them.
Can I kind of give an echo? I'm sorry, Mr. Cody.
I agree with you. We just had the same problem with this town administrator. The department heads asked for a lot of stuff. It was never passed on to anybody else.
Yep,
Can
but
I can
that's-
kind of...
Okay, but be that as it may, that's really not our,
Well, I was just going to say, from an outside perspective, from being on the...
okay, one person talks at a time, please. Go ahead, Alex. Yep, you done? You done?
Yeah, I'm all set.
Yep, okay. Now, I'll come back to you, Jennifer. In all due respect to the department heads, once the council votes, it doesn't make fiddly-dee or fiddly-dum. You know, and we can make our opinion, and that they can try, but in reality, it becomes the council's thing. And whatever you want to do is fine with me. I'm pointing out the dichotomy, and I'm pointing out that we spend a lot of time going over the same ground. Now I'm going to come back to Jennifer.
I just wanted to say, from an outside thing, from attending a lot of the meetings or watching them last year, one of the things that I found beneficial when the department comes up is that you could ask specific questions, and from a voter standpoint, I found that very helpful to know exactly what they were. It wasn't just a line item or a group, or you could find out and actually kind of talk to them about their needs and the questions that came from you all to them as well. I don't know from this side of the table where you're saying that it might not be beneficial, but from sitting over there, I found it beneficial.
I think it's an instructive opportunity in just in the process of democracy. It's a point of information, a way to share what's going on in each budget and to communicate that to the town.
I have a question. In the process, when the town council puts forth the budget, there's usually a line item or a column that will say the requested from the department head. Is that something that's codified, that is part of the process, or is that just something that we find helpful? Because that gets to some of the point is like what will happen is we can have many of the different department heads come in, explain what the different line items are, help us understand what some of the priorities are. Then a couple of weeks goes by and the town council is looking at the overall picture and making some decisions. And then the town council comes back and says, okay, now here's where we are, but we have some background on things. But what it found very helpful was before the town council finalizes, when you talk to the department head, you get that sense of what the priorities are and many of the probably very difficult decisions that the town council has to make to try to come up with a balanced budget. So a question would be is that if we, at least if we had the column knowing what's been requested, we know whether there's some differences.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, and-
Right?
and-
So that wouldn't go away, right?
No.
But if you go to a new world where you say it would only be the town council being able to answer our questions, and it would be up to them to decide whether the department heads come, much like the school committee or the superintendent decides that he and a few staff members will be the ones who will answer the questions, not the individual principals.
And that the department head request in our preliminary budget is there, and then the column we have on the particular edition I'm looking at, which will change, says the town administrator request, which really should have been the town council request.
Mm-hmm.
So then we can see the dichotomy between the two. And I only throw it out. I'm okay either way. It just takes a lot of time, not only our time, but also the department heads' times, but be that as it may.
My question would be for the budget committee members that have served previously. I know a lot doesn't change when they come to talk, but you can ask questions. Is there a way we could try to do it in one night with almost more of a question and answer than rather a presentation? They're just available for questioning instead of presenting?
All of the department heads at once?
Well, I'm thinking we have DPW, fire, and police, correct?
Among others, yes.
And there's, what's
I
that?
would,
Well, because it goes as far as.
well, I would say that we might be able to have a couple folks, but the difference between, particularly the major departments, the issues between police, the issues between fire, the issues between the school department, they're quite wide. So I think a sort of a smorgasbord approach would not be particularly productive. I think that could dwindle into spin into chaos rather quickly.
I was just thinking of conserving time. That's all.
Yeah.
Is there, if I say something, another way to do it is, as we're presenting the budget, those department heads we're talking about are in the audience. So as we're presenting it, if you have any questions, and quite frankly, I don't know all the answers to all the, then they can come up and answer, and that might help you a little bit at least, because we're talking about it, and they're here to talk about it too, and that might conserve some time. It's just a suggestion, that's all.
I like that.
But it's totally up to you, but I will remind you, once the council votes, that's it. And I'll also remind you that we only recommend. We do not make policy. That's the job of the school committee and the town council. Now, the charter says we're responsible for making a recommendation of the value of the services versus the cost of the taxes. And each of you, as an elected official or an appointee to an elected position, have absolute right to come to that conclusion however you want to do it. You know, if I particular, and I'm fairly, I like to read stuff. So, and I'm familiar with a lot of it. But I look at what is the comprehensive plan. What does the comprehensive plan say that the town should be doing? The school has done, and I think now it's 3 years ago, they did a massive review of their facilities. I think it was about like that. Very detailed, hired an outside firm. This year, the municipality has put together, it was on the website for a while. It wasn't exactly goals, it was, but it was the beginnings of a capital plan. So I look at those. And then you get into the issues of which is more important. Do we have all new cars at the police department on the frontline cars, or do we spend a little bit more money at the library? You know, each of you have to make those decisions. So, and if I'm getting the sense that the consensus is that you want to continue the tradition to talk to the department heads, and that's fine. But then what we want to do is make sure that the council has voted on the department head's budget before they get here. Because it's really nonsense to have the department head come and talk when the council hasn't acted on their request. So we'll have to juggle that a little bit. Now, last year, what we did, we went from biggest to smallest. So, well, we had a couple exceptions. We had the treasurer and I think the town clerk give their presentations. Then within the broader municipality, we went from biggest, which was police department, then fire department, DPW, on down. So first off, am I correct in reading the consensus is that you want to have the department heads come? Now, yeah, I'll just leave it there. Mrs. Hilton, you have.
The only thing that Tricia Hilton, the only thing I might like to point out is that we will shortly, we hope, have a new town administrator who the department heads will report to. And, you know, ultimately, I think the new town administrator has some authority over whether or not he would prefer or not prefer his department heads to be here, or whether or not he would be. And so the only thing I'd ask is that once the new administrator is here, depending on what his decision is, that you would respect that.
Let me pontificate a moment about that. And I think that's technically correct. And I contemplated saying, you know, if Mrs. Mello put the word out to the department heads, don't you dare show up, there's nothing we can do about it. Now, I don't think Mrs. Mello is going to do that, but if she chose to do it, she could. Now, having said that, if a new town administrator comes in, and we've already interviewed a couple department heads, and the new town administrator suddenly comes in and says, no more of that, I would make a risky prognostication that the lifespan of that town administrator would be very short, because I think there would be a rather vociferous reaction to the closing off of a process that was started. I can be all wet. Won't be the first time I've been wrong on a prediction. But
I'm sorry, because Nancy has the authority to do it right now.
yes, she does. I think.
Obviously, that would be, I mean, but I'm going to say this. The chart is pretty clear on this.
Would you come up and talk to the microphone, please, Mrs. Mello? If you would, please. That would be helpful.
Nancy Mello.
Acting interim town administrator.
Coral Lane. Coral Lane. Now, I will say this. The chart is pretty clear. It is the council's preliminary budget that goes to you. It is the council's final budget that goes to you.
Absolutely.
And I'm not quite sure yet who is has the responsibility of this docket or format or whatever. I mean, you could very well not see department head requests in there again. The council has the charge to present that budget to you because it is their votes. When the people get what they're going to vote on, this docket, as I call it, I know Cecil doesn't like to call it a docket, but whatever, this document, they do not see what the department head requests are when this goes out. They see council recommendation and budget committee recommendation. So you're putting a lot of weight on what that department head request is, when quite frankly, if I had known this, boy, I would have upped my requests, because you could put anything on there, but it is the council that has to determine whether that is the priority that needs doing on the overall budget. So it is very important, I think, anybody else can differ with me, to have a department head here when your council or your administrator is talking about the budget, but for the purpose of questioning and being able to answer those questions. They know their budget intimately, far better than a counselor would, or even the administrator would, because they're utilizing that budget every single day. But that's the purpose, and always was the purpose years before. In my almost 30 years of doing this, the department heads was always side by side with the administrator or the council, whoever was up presenting the budget. But it was not to pitch two different budgets. It was to substantiate and explain the council's budget, because that's the only one that the charter says comes to you, the council.
Yep.
Was last
Recently,
year,
that's true.
When we attended last year, was last year the first year that was kind of done like that, where the department heads came and presented theirs? Was it done differently?
No.
It's been different throughout years, all the way through.
Yep.
But it never changes from the fact that
the council has to first meet with their department heads, come up with what they're saying. I mean, I could say in there, I need a new vault, and I need $80,000. Council may say, no, Nance, you don't need it. But maybe I could convince this budget committee that I need a new vault. We have records that are not in vault that need to be in vault. So it'd be like me as a department pushing through a different agenda than what the council is saying. So absolutely, those department heads have a role in this presenting, in that they are the intimate users of these budgets. But it is only to the point that the council approves where they're going. And that is the only budget that belongs before the budget committee.
Yep.
The councils, it's in the charter.
Yep, that's right. I agree with that 100%. Just being really, really picky. If Mrs. Mello, wearing her town clerk hat, wanted $80,000 for a new vault, the town council would have absolutely nothing to say about it.
Well, that was for example.
Yes, I understand. I'm just being...
Just testing us.
I'm
Just testing,
I'm
but if
just-
the tax
just being
collector
picky.
wanted one. Yeah.
I'm just being picky. So, we want the town, we want the department heads to come. We're going to assume that Mrs. Mello isn't going to preclude that. So, the next thing we need to decide is the flow. In past years, we've started with page 1. The committee has started with page 1 and gone through so many a meeting and set up the appointments with the departments, and there was some variability based on the department head's availability. Last year, we followed biggest number first, second, third. So I thought that worked quite well because on some of the smaller departments, when you get down to the Senior Citizen Center, they run on such a bare bones budget that it's difficult, other than maybe some of their capital expenditures, to say a whole lot. But we need to decide the order of business so we can start setting up both the site visits and also the appearances of the department heads before the committee. We also I'll keep coordinating with Mrs. D. Medeiros as far as who, like she mentioned tonight, they've already talked to the DPW superintendent, but there's been no vote. And they may not vote. Looking at it from the council's standpoint, they may want to hear from police and fire before they start deciding where the priorities match up to the dollars. So just bear with me for the next week or so until we figure out a little bit better flow.
I'll communicate.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So, next thing I do have, does anybody have any questions where we're at? Number one, I'll be looking for a site visit planning helper next week, spreadsheet production next week. And then the next thing is distribution of documents. And I have this one. This is
Excuse me, Cecil, I'm going to get going, but this is the vehicle list.
Vehicle
okay?
list, okay.
And this is money for Mike.
Now,
Fundraiser.
Look at some fundraiser.
Did you capture that?
I'm really sorry.
That's
for the Picasso kids.
yes,
Thanks to
it's
My daughter's stipend.
It's a fundraiser for the Pocasset School, for the record, not the budget committee.
It was.
Okay, to get money for what specific?
Okay, now I'm going to pass around a letter from the school department. Okay.
Oh, okay. Okay.
All right, let's,
They do extra trips for kids.
let's see.
Not extra trip, or something that they did with them.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Do you have another one of these?
Yeah. Some of them found out if you raise the body up.
When
Put
you
the
say
weight over the back axle.
one of which, Deb?
Leave this one. Deb, this one?
Yep.
Someone else need the vehicle one? Was that one?
Nope, I have
Is there one more of these?
Of what?
The school committee letter.
Yep.
Sorry.
Okay. So everybody at this point should have a school committee letter and a set of vehicles listing. Are we there? Okay. And the next thing, I have the town clerk's preliminary budget, and I note for the record that it was clocked in on January 12th, so the deadline was met to get it in. Should be 4. Okay, one.
Thank you very much.
Cecil, for the record, too. Apparently, the school department is being frugal because Mr. Fiore is no longer the Director of Administration and Finance.
Yep.
It's just, he's on the top of the paper, so just as far as,
Yep.
he's not the one that's reporting. They do have a new one now, correct?
Yes, we do.
Thank you.
But we have no paper, so we'll go back.
Yeah, no, that's what I figured. That's what
By all means, please exhaust the old paper, even if you have to, redact his name.
You're confused for a minute.
Okay. So you should now have, after document passing, you should have a list of vehicles. You should have the town clerk's budget, a letter from the school department. And I think that's it. And you've got the treasurer's budget also. Okay. So that brings us to the other category. Anybody have any other thing?
Cecil, I wanted to, I don't know if we need a vote about how we want to do this, but last year, there were a lot of documents that would come during the meeting, and I think we made a decision that we wouldn't, except for just clarifying or explaining what the document was, is that there wasn't any kind of substantive discussion on a document that was handed out in a meeting. It gave us we could bring it up the next time for sure on the agenda, but it allowed people to kind of look at what was given to us. And making sure that those documents got attached to the minutes so that they became part of the public record. So just for the new members, it's something that there's a lot of helpful stuff, there's a lot of information that can come, and it's really hard to sit here in a meeting and try to make a decision on something that you haven't had a chance to study. So my hope would be is that we continue that practice, that welcome anyone, whether it's a citizen or one of the budget committee members, but that we give ourselves the time. Correct.
Yeah. And I think that makes eminent good sense, because you can't just the documents do flow. So I think that's a good point. Barring somebody feeling differently, I don't think we need to vote. I think that falls under the common sense category.
Yeah, one thing that happened sometimes is there were pressing time constraints on getting that information, so that was the only thing that precluded having enough time sometimes, but you're right, I agree. I just wanted to mention that sometimes we had time constraints. What about accepting comments from the public? I just want to know what we're going to decide on that. I had an idea of having people submit a short written statement of what they wanted to say first, and then keep it really close to that. Anybody have any ideas on that? Public comment? Go ahead.
Well, I've given this a lot of thought after all the angst we had last year about this. I firmly believe that any member of the public should be able to address us about the issue at hand now. Not about what happened last year, not what about happened 20 years ago, not about what we might want to talk about 2 weeks later, but the issue on the agenda today. We should also have somebody among us timing them. They should be able to come up here. We tell them at the beginning of the meeting, you have 3 minutes. Put them on a timer. And there's a half-minute nut. Do like the wrestlers do. They know. They're done. If we don't do that, we end up having a free-for-all. At the same time, then the chairman, if they start to digress away from where they're supposed to be, he tells them, we're not going to discuss that, get back on track, or sit down. You got to be firm with them, but you got to be polite.
Yeah, and I can tell you from experience last year, when I told them to get back on track, they stayed right where they were going. And when I told them to sit down, when they finished their piece, then they sat down. And I could never bring myself, and we don't have a sergeant at arms or an officer.
Do we need a sergeant here?
But we've never.
I think I only function for the town council. I don't believe I function for you.
Well, that's open to debate, but in any case, I have great reluctance to bring physical force to bear to shut somebody down. And once they get up and start talking, it's hard. Because that's not an overt criticism of anybody. It's because the people that did get up and talk feel very passionately about what they're saying. It takes most people are not comfortable getting up in front of a group of people and talking. So when somebody comes up at a public meeting and starts speaking, that indicates that they've got some willpower of what they're doing, and they typically really feel strongly about what they want to say. And once they get on a roll, short of gaveling them down, it's difficult to cut them off. And we had the 3-minute rule last year. And we can do that again. It's no problem. I would throw out one other idea, not leaving the discussion. One of the things that bothers me is that by the time we make a public hearing presentation of our budget recommendations to the public, everything is set in concrete. The copies have been run. There's nothing that can be done. So I did give some thought that maybe before the deadline for the primary budget is that the budget committee schedule a public hearing where we would advertise, where we would make the preliminary budget available, and then have people come and address in the public hearing. And then that gets away from the individual, well, 15 years ago, your kid kicked my kid, and I've never forgotten this, and I'm being facetious, excuse me.
I like Ruth's idea about asking people if they have it, if they could submit their 3-minute statement. Like they wouldn't be required, but if they, like, it would be nice if they came with it and delivered it to the committee and it could go on record.
I like Mr. Edwards' suggestion where you're directed to stay within the agenda, the topics that we are discussing, not going back, not going forward, but here are your questions or your answers or what you'd like to talk about that we're going to be discussing, and try to focus it down.
I agree, keep it on point. But if...
See, both of those can happen, your written and your spoken.
They wouldn't have to submit?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd want to require it, because I think it's like,
Yeah,
kind of like
wouldn't
what,
have to, but
yeah.
then it could be a decent record.
Right.
And it's like she said, some people are not going to be comfortable coming up here and talking, but they have no trouble at all writing something
Right.
down.
So
And
that
if they
makes
want
some
to give
people-
that to us,
How are you going to get that out to the public that they can write something down? I mean,
Would go on.
I think you could announce it at the beginning of every meeting that there's some forms, they can take them with them, they can submit them at their leisure, and when
Okay.
it's been handed in, we can...
Isn't Charter Review doing something similar where they can submit a request to be on?
but the deadline's passed for that.
No, I know, I was just
They
asking.
are, yes, they
No,
are.
I was asking how they did
Well,
it. They
Yes.
did a similar type procedure
Yes.
where you submitted first and then you could be
You're right.
heard at the meeting.
Yeah,
Proposals.
the way we get the word out is twofold. First, we talk about it here, which is on TV. And the other thing, I can, if the committee authorizes me, I can write a brief note to the newspapers, probably either as a press release or a letter to the editor, which reminds me of something I should say. If, as we go through the season, any of you feel the need to opine as a letter to the editor on a particular thing, that's fine. That's your right, privilege, and all that stuff. But please just make sure that when you write your letter of your opinion, you always say, I am speaking only for myself. And I won't write anything to the press or release anything to the press unless we have a majority vote telling me to do so, because it's not my committee. I'm just kind of trying to use the rudder. So
I have a question then. Are you supposed to say, I'm writing this as a member of the Budget Committee, this is just my view, or can you also write as a citizen of the town? You can do either?
either.
Okay.
But you have to
Just-
let the publication know that you're a member of the committee, correct? Because I know like last year underneath them, they would say like
That-
your name and budget, you were on the budget.
I think you
committee.
can do it as a
That's-
resident,
that's-
just a voter,
the
though, too.
Papers do that.
Oh, you mean say, I'm a member of the Budget
No,
Committee,
when
but
they
I'm...
were, when they would be published and they were
Right.
signed at the bottom, it would say like Cecil Leonard, budget committee member, I forgot how it was worded, but the paper did note that you were on the committee,
And-
even though you
You're
were making
speaking-
your own
okay.
opinions.
Yeah, but that's, the publication does that.
So
There's a
you don't
couple
sign it
times-
that way,
No,
they do that.
They did that. But the couple times I did write, I stated right up front, I'm writing this as an individual member, an individual person, not as a representative of the budget.
And there
committee.
were a couple times in the paper last year where there were statements made saying the budget committee decided. And it could be inferred that everyone agreed, and that was not accurate. So that's a good point.
Yeah, one of the things that gets very interesting, and I'm struggling a little bit because I want to resist from slipping back to my organizational development professor role. But one of the interesting things very quickly is that we decide everything by a majority vote. But the dynamics of the situation, aided, I think, to a good degree by social media, is that even if it's a one-vote difference, suddenly it becomes, well, the Budget Committee said, well, only by one vote. And people tend to overlook that it's only one vote. So it's important that we all keep in mind that we decide things by the majority vote. That doesn't mean we're unanimous. I know for a fact on one item in here that Ms. Rashley and I do not agree. And we will never agree, and that's okay. She's entirely, we're each entitled to our opinion. But so, yeah, that's why I get a little bit wary about the social media and all how that gets distorted. But just be aware. And I said this back, I think, on December 14th, and I'll say it again. No matter what you do, no matter how you vote, you're going to tick some people off. So you're always in the position of being a bad person. So, yeah.
Or people might disagree.
Well, let me tell you.
You always agree to disagree.
Yes.
Like being married, you're always going to be in the doghouse.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to go there. And Mrs. Black has a philosophical look to her
No,
face.
no, I just want to thank you, because it seems there's a consensus there can be public comment.
Yep.
I've been coming here since, 2002, and there always was. So I just want to make one comment on something that was on the agenda, if that's okay. Point of information about the bonds. It's a wealth-based formula. The bottom is 30. You can't go any lower than 30. So when Tiverton only got 31, Mr. Fiore, Mr. Edwards, and I went up every year to the state and asked, because other communities were building with 35, 36, that, were much wealthier than ourselves. Some communities were building at 80%. At the same time, we were building at 30. So every year we went up to the state, testified. It wouldn't have hurt the state, but it would have helped Tiverton every single year if we had been able to go up to 35, 36. Now they say maybe 39. If it's helped, then we'll have to go through all that. It might be 35, but it's better than 31. But my point is, all that money would have helped the citizens of Tiverton, and every year the state said no. Now, as you can see, everyone's talking about it. So Tiverton citizens gave all that money, and now maybe the state's going to have a bond. But I just wanted you all to know we tried every year, and the answer from the General Assembly was no, Tiverton's not going to get that extra money. Thank you.
That's not.
Anything else, excuse me, anything else under other? Okay, hearing none, I'll look for a motion. Well, I will say that I'll put an agenda together, get that to Mike so he can post it, and this time I'll remember to send it to everybody else when I send it to Mike. And I do want to thank Deb for helping Mike get started. Do I have a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor? Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.